News Talk on demand. Interruption-free audio where you want it, when you want it.
Oh, I was at a place the other day, same thing. The hairdryer, you're sitting there thinking, this hand dryer is going on, and you're thinking, my hands are actually getting cold. And then what do? Yeah, then you wipe it in your pants, wipe in your jacket, and off you go. Love it. Because you remember your standard of living in your life is supposed to get better as we advance in technology. Not so fast on that one, Buster. All right. You know, when I saw this book, I wasn't going to go much further with it because while we do talk about works of fiction, the fiction that I'm not creating every day, it is it is fairly rare though because there are so many books being written, and you know we get big authors in. I mean, Sarah Gruen, the great Water for Elephants author who we had on when she wrote that book a few years ago, she's going to be here next week on At the Water's Edge. And Sarah is an amazing person. Another wonderful book out that I've just been reading, and it's a terrific read. So make sure you're here next week for this. But when I saw this came from Jim Brayshaw, I thought this is interesting because this guy in Saskatoon who has written a series of books over the years on world religions, and boy, does he go deep on the analysis, has now turned his considerable writing skills to fiction. The book is called Utopia. That's Y-O-U, Topia. What if you were king of the world? And it's a bit of a dystopian look at the future, but it does ask you that interesting question. What if you were the king of the world? We find Jim Brayshaw in his home base of Saskatoon this morning. Hey, good to have you back, buddy.
Great to be here with you, John. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so how many books now, before we get here, how many have you written so far on religion and world faith?
That series you spoke of was 4 volumes, and, you know, it's being translated into Spanish by a Puerto Rican theologian and into Hindi by an Indian pastor, and we're really sailing along nicely.
Good stuff. So what turned your thought to going into fiction?
Well, you know, a guy wants to write essays on how to fix the world, and I don't know anybody who's going to play the king of the world role much better than you, John, in your spot.
Oh, no, I thought that was you. See, I thought this was you. Finally, they'd recognized you should be the king. I mean, I've thought I'm the king for a while, but I would defer.
Well, neither of us happen to be in this book, John, but what kind of guided me in the fiction direction was asking the question when we used to school our children, what if you could change things? What would you do? And asking around the coffee table, well, if I was king of the world, I'd do this, I'd fix this. And then decided it's time to put together not just a series of essays, but an actual novel that takes place in 28 years from today that shows what happens when the world is the degradation has just spiraled down and the World Congress now runs the world. And they say, you know, it's time to appoint a truly benevolent king. Let's do that instead of let democracy continue try to drag us along to the good human condition where we all want to be at.
Okay, so the UN has disappeared. The World Congress has been established. It's unified certain things. I mean, it's solved the Mideast issues. God, that would be something. International conflict. There's one world language, one world currency. But why do they then turn to a king or a benevolent dictator?
Well, as you know, like society never really changes. All the corruptive practices, the disturbed practices, the human condition continue to go on and on and on. If you think of business corruption, government corruption, abuse in families, pedophilia, wage disparity, gender inequity, it just carries on, and democracy's tried to put its hand to it for, let's say 2,000 years since the Greeks started providing it to us, that product. And they say, you know, there's been kings in the history of the world that have truly been benevolent in their own geographic location and have brought the good to the people that the people were asking for. So somebody in the World Congress, in this world-ruling government, says, let's try a king. And it's a compelling enough argument to say, you know what, we're going to give it a whirl. And the timing is right. The way the story outlines, the way the solar eclipse takes place, and the previous edicts that have all been put in place by the World Congress, they lead to this, saying, yeah, we got to try something different, and maybe it's this king who can really avoid corruption and be that good, benevolent, ruling the greatest good for the greatest number, as we all think rulers should do.
Jim Brayshaw with us. The new book is Utopia. That's Y-O-U, Topia. What if you were the king of the world? Okay, so you write that the most insidious of all issues, you talk about, again, human behavior, which hasn't changed. I mean, in this dystopian future, 28 years from now, a lot of the big issues have been solved, but there's still crime, there's still victimization going on. But the greatest cancer, you write, is apathy.
Yes, and it seems to be apparent all throughout history that apathy has prevented us, reasonable people, from moving forward with reason. And even Pierre Trudeau said reason over passion, which is quoted by one of the leaders in Utopia, that that we can use reasonable stance and reasonable actions to remove these undesirable attitudes in society, which all stem from apathy, John. We find ourselves always kind of justifying not getting involved. And really, that's an apathy that sits really in the deep of our soul that says, you know what, I can live without jumping in on this and doing something to change it.
So in this book, as it plays out, does a king get chosen, or is there a competition of sorts going on to determine who will be that king?
Well, here's the interesting deliberations that go on by the World Congress, John. They realized that we could go on and we could get John Gormley's application and Jim Brayshaw's application and so-and-so's application and vet them all. But right now is the time. And if time is truly our master, then let's honor time and find a king from these three particular citizens who sent letters to the World Congress on a very pivotal weekend when they're deliberating at the time of a solar eclipse.
All right. Now, the book, as far as you've done a lot of work on your other 4 books, and this is your first foray into fiction. So in terms of the work and how you set up a book like this, was it a different writing experience?
It was. I thought I'd have this off the desk and onto the shelf in about 3 months because I loved the concept so much. It took me about 2 years to write because putting the chapter outlines together, then you just kind of you sort through the thinking and you want to refine things so that the arguments the king brings and the World Congress brings are really sound arguments. And then eventually it starts to take shape, and then you cut 100 pages out so you can bring a readable size book to the masses.
So, okay, I love that because the bit of writing I've done, I've always thought it's better to start with way more than you need and then, cut it back, and what's left is a sculpture, right?
Well, so true, the sculpture, but it's so hard to remove stuff that you think should be in the book. Your actually segue about hand washing and using the air dryer, the electric air dryer, was interesting. It made me think of one of the more mundane laws that this king edicts. He has an encounter in a smelly movie theater where there's BO and spicy food aromas, and it just doesn't smell good. So eventually he edicts a public aroma law where you can't, it's 2043, you can't go outside stinky and out to the public. You should be able to clean yourself up if you're going to be out in public. So they measure people's public aroma in certain situations.
So, this sounds interesting. Always good having you by, my friend. If people want to pick up a copy of Utopia, you've got it on Kindle, again, as your other books are. Also, local bookstores carrying it too?
Yeah, McNally Robinson has it, and Kohl's Midtown has it, and it's available on Amazon in paperback. And kingoftheworld.co as well is where you can find copies of that Utopia.
Always good chatting, Mr. Brayshaw. Thanks for this.
Take care, John.
You too. Jim Brayshaw, Saskatoon guy, for many years a firefighter in Saskatoon, who has this thing. I mean, when you talk about the 4 books he's written on religion and biblical interpretation, boy, these books are being translated in other languages. He has a huge following in the faith community on those. But now this new book called Utopia, What If You Were the King of the World? Out now. I know, everybody does that. If I were the king, yes. That's just the benevolent dictatorship. You know that. I mean, you would make a great and benevolent dictator, as long as I stayed on your right side. I'm John Gormley. This is News Talk 980 CJME and 650 CKOM.